Good morning, children. Today, our story is about Black Beauty, and it was written very early by Nlavl. So, let's start the story. The very first place that I can remember was a large, pleasant meadow. To start with, I lived on my mother's milk. As soon as I could get to eat grass, she had to go out to work and come home in the evening. There were 6 young colts in the meadow besides me. We had great fun galloping around, although they would sometimes bite and kick. One day my mother whined to me and she said, "Come here. The colts who live here are very good colts, but they are cart horse colts. And of course, they have not learned manners. I hope you will grow up gentle and good and never learn bad ways. Do your work well as you can and never bite or kick, even while playing." My mother was a very wise old horse, and I have never forgotten her advice. Her name was Duchess, but our master often called her Pet. As I grew older, I grew handsome. I had one white foot and a pretty white star on my forehead. My black coat grew fine and soft. When I was 4 years old, Square Gordon came to look at me. He seemed to like me and said, "When he has been broken in, he will do very well." My master said he would break me in himself so that I would not be frightened or hurt. Well, actually, breaking in means to teach a horse to wear a saddle and bridle and to carry someone safely on his back. He must also learn to pull a carriage or a cart, going fast or slow, just as his driver wishes. He has to learn never to bite or kick, nor jump at anything he sees. Even with good master like mine, it was slow work, but at last it was done. Next came iron shoes. That was frightening, but the blacksmith did not hurt me. Even when he drove nails through the shoe right into my hoof, my feet seemed stiff and heavy afterwards, but in time I got used to that. Now that I was ready to leave home, my mother said to me, "I hope you will fall into good hands. But as a horse never knows who may buy him or who may drive him. Some men are kind and thoughtful like our master. Others can be cruel. Remember, do your best whatever happens and keep up your good name." I don't know what time of night it was, but I woke up feeling very, very uncomfortable. I listened and heard a soft rushing noise and a low crackling and snapping. There was something so strange about it that it made me tremble all over. At last, Dick Toller burst into the stable with a lantern and began to untie the horses to lead them out. He seemed so frightened himself that he frightened us as well, and none of us would go with him. He tried us all in turn, then left the stable. I saw a red light flickering on the wall and heard a roaring noise. Then there was a cry of "Fire!" outside. The next thing I heard was James' voice, quiet and cheery as it always was. "Come on, Beauty, we'll soon be out of here." He took the scarf off his neck and tied it lightly over my eyes and patting. Safe in the yard, he slipped the scarf off my eyes and shouted, "Here, somebody, take this horse while I go back for another." A tall, broad man stepped forward and took me, and James ran back into the stable. I set up a shrill whining as I saw him go. Ginger told me afterwards that Whiny was the best thing I could have done for her. Had she not heard me outside, she would never have had the courage to come out. There was much confusion in the yard as the horses were brought out of their stables. I kept my eye fixed on the stable door, where the smoke poured out thicker than ever, and I could see flashes of red light. The next moment, I gave a loud, joyful neigh. There was James coming through the smoke, leading Ginger. She was coughing violently, and he was unable to speak. Suddenly, there came a sound of galloping feet and loud rumbling wheels. Two horses dashed into the yard with a heavy fire engine behind them, and the firemen leaped to the ground. There was no need to ask where the fire was. It rose in a great blaze from the roof. Next day, everyone was wondering how the fire had started. At last, an ostler remembered that Dick Towler had been smoking a pipe when he came into the stable. Dick said that he had put his pipe down, but no one believed him. Pipes were never allowed in the stable at Britswick Park, and I thought it ought to be the rule everywhere. After that terrible night, it was good to get back home to Burswick Park. John was equally glad to see us and had a good deal of praise for the courage James had shown at the fire. Before he and James left us for the night, James said, "Who's coming in my place?" "Little Joe Green at the lodge," said John. "He's small, but he's quick and willing to be kind-hearted too." The next day, Joe came to the stables to learn all he could before James left. He learned to sweep the stables and bring in the new straw and hay. He began to clean the harness and helped to wash the carriage. He was too small to groom Ginger and me, so James taught him on Merrylegs. He was a nice little fellow and always came whistling to his work. Merrylegs was a good deal put out at being mauled about, as he said, by a boy who knew nothing. Towards the end of the second week, however, he told me confidently that he thought the boy would turn out well. At last the day came when James had to leave us. He wasn't very happy about it, for he looked quite downhearted that morning. John tried to cheer him up, but everyone was sorry to lose James. Not long after James had left, I was awakened suddenly in the night by the stable bell ringing loudly. Then John came in saying, "Wake up, Beauty! You must go fast now if ever you did. The mistress is ill and we must go for the doctor." We went like the wind, and the church clock struck 3 as we drew up at Dr. White's door. John knocked at the door like thunder. A window was thrown up, and Dr. White put his head out and said, "What do you want?" "Mrs. Gordon is very ill, sir. Master wants you to go at once. He thinks she will die if you cannot get there." Dr. White was soon at the door. "The worst of it is, my horse had been out all day and is quite done up. What is to be done? Can I have your horse?" "He has come at a gallop nearly all the way, sir, but I think my master would not be against it if you think fit, sir." "All right, I'll soon be ready." The way back seemed long, but I did my best. I was glad to get home. My legs shook under me and I could only stand and pant. I had not a dry hair on my body and the water ran down my legs. For the first few days I was very ill, and Mr. Bond, the horse doctor, came every day. John would get up 2 or 3 times in the night to come see me. My master often came to see me too. "My poor Beauty," he said one day, "you saved your mistress' life." I was very glad to hear that, for it seems the doctor had said if he had been a little longer it would have been too late. I don't know how long I was ill, but I thought I was going to die. And I believe they all thought so too. When I grew well again, I found that sad changes were about to happen. We heard from time to time that our mistress was ill. Then we heard that she must go to a warm country for 2 or 3 years. The master began immediately to make arrangements for leaving England. We used to hear it talked about it in our stable. Indeed, nothing else was talked about. John went about his work silent and sad, and Joe scarcely whistled. At last the day came when we took our master and mistress to the station. As the train glided away, John came back. We shall never see her again. Never. He took the reins, mounted the box, and with Joe drove slowly home. But it would not be home to us for now. Next morning, Joe took Merrylegs to the vicarage, for he had been given to the vicar. Then John took Ginger and me to Earlshall Park, where we were to live. Mr. York was our new coachman there. He called a groom to take us to a light, airy stable. In a short while, John and Mr. York came in to see us. John said, "I had better mention that we were never used to be bearing grain with either of these horses." "Well," said York, "if they come here, they will have to wear the bearing rein. My lady has to have style, and her carriage horses have to be reined up tight." Then John came around to each of us to pat and speak to us for the last time. His voice sounded very sad. I never saw him again. The next afternoon we took my lady for a drive. When she came out, she said, "York, you must put those horses' heads higher. They're not fit to be seen." York gone down and shortened the bearing rein by one hole. And I began to understand what I had heard. It made it much harder to pull uphill. As the days went by, the rein grew really short. I was very unhappy. But Ginger hated it. One dreadful day came when she kicked York's hat off and reared so much that she fell down. After this, Ginger was used for hunting and was never put into a carriage again. I was given a new partner called Max, but we still had to suffer the tight train. In my old home, I always knew that John and my master were my friends. Here at Earlshall, although I was quite well treated, but I had no friends. York never tried to help over that train. Time went on, and I grew tired and depressed, hating my work, but sadly, much, much worse was to come. When our master and his family went to London in the spring, they left Reuben Smith in charge of the horses that stayed behind. He was a good man most of the time. He had but one great fault, however. He loved to drink, although he had promised never to touch another drop. But before the family was due to return, Smith had to go to town and choose me for the journey. On the way there, he was his usual thoughtful self. In town, however, he began to drink, and it was late when he was starting back. Suddenly, he began to gallop harder and harder. Sometimes he whipped me, although I was already going at full speed. I had a loose shoe, and the speed we were going at loosened it still more. It came off, and I stumbled, falling on my knees. Smith was flung off by my fall and lay groaning some distance away. After a while, he stopped groaning and lay still. At first, it was thought that Reuben Smith's death was my fault. Then my sore hoof was discovered, and everyone realized that Smith must have been drinking again. Later, several people said that he had been drunk when we left town. As soon as my knees were more or less healed, I was turned into a small meadow for a month or two. Ginger was there too, and we were glad to see each other. She said that she had been ruined by hard riding, and they were going to see if rest would help. We both felt that way. One day the Earl came into the meadow, York with him. The Earl seemed very annoyed as they looked at us over. What makes me most angry is that these horses of my old friend who thought they would find a good home with me are ruined. The black one will have to be sold. I can't have knees like that in my stables. See if you can find him a good home. And about a week later, I was bought by the master of some livery stables and left Earlshall. I had become a job horse, which meant that I could be hired out to anyone who wished to drive me. Some of the people who wanted to hire me couldn't drive at all. As I was good-tempered and gentle, I think I was more often let out to the bad drivers than some of the other horses, because I could be depended upon. Of course, we sometimes came in for good driving. One morning I was put into a light gig and taken to a house in Pulteney Street. Two gentlemen came out. The taller of them took the reins, and I can remember even now how quietly he turned me round. Then, with a light feel of the rein and drawing the whip gently across my back, we were off. I arched my neck and set off at my best pace because I had someone behind me who knew how a good horse ought to be driven. It seemed like old times again. This gentleman took a great liking to me, and eventually I was sold to a friend of his who wanted a safe, pleasant horse for riding. So that summer I was sold to Mr. Barry, and I had yet another new master. At the beginning, this seemed a good chance and a very good change. My groom was a man called Filcher. He had once been an oldster at a hotel, but now he grew fruit and vegetables for the market. His wife bred and fattened chickens and rabbits for sale. Filcher kept the stable clean and airy, and he groomed me thoroughly. He was never otherwise than gentle, and he certainly knew his job. When I first went there, I heard the master give the order for food. The best hay with oats and beans, and bran with rye grass, as Filcher thought necessary. I was going to be well off. After a while, however, I found I wasn't getting anything like the amount of oats I should have had. I grew tired and unhappy. A farmer friend of Mr. Barry noticed this one day. He looked me over more carefully. Then he said to my master, "I don't know who gets the oats you pay for, but it certainly isn't your horse. I suggest you look into what's happening in your stable." Unfortunately, some scoundrels are mean enough to rob a dumb beast of his food. When Mr. Barry took his advice, the police discovered that my oats were being fed to Mrs. Fletcher's rabbits. Had I been able to speak, I could have told him that. I had seen Fletcher's little boy come every morning to collect the oats that his father stole. Fletcher went to prison for 2 months, and in a few days' time, I had a new groom. Alfred Smirk was a tall, good-looking fellow. But if there was a humbug in the shape of a groom, he was that man. He was very civil to me and never used me ill. In fact, he did a great deal of stroking and patting when his master was there to see it. He thought himself very handsome and spent a great deal of time in front of the mirror in the harness room. Everyone thought he was a very nice young man, but I should say he was the laziest, most conceited fellow I have ever come across. Of course, it was a great thing not to be ill-used, but then a horse wants more than that. I had a loose box and might have been very comfortable if Smirk had not been too lazy to clean it out and take the damn straw away. And as to cleaning my feet or looking into my shoes or grooming me properly, he never did those things at all. Because I was standing on damp straw most of the day, My feet grew unhealthy and tender. When I stumbled twice in an afternoon, my master took me to the farrier to see what was wrong. Your horse, your horse has got the thrush, and badly too, said the farrier. His feet are very tender. We find this sort of thing in dirty stables where the litter isn't cleaned out. His feet will take a while to heal properly. He cleaned and treated each hoof in turn, and then he ordered all the litter to be taken out of my box day by day, and the floor kept very clean. It wasn't all that long before my feet were all right again. Mr. Berry, however, was so much disgusted at being twice deceived by his grooms that he decided to give up keeping a horse altogether. I was sold once more, and this time into a very different kind of life. My new master was a cab driver called Jeremiah Barker, usually known as Jerry. That evening, I knew I was going to be happy there. Jerry's wife Polly came to see me and make friends, along with their 8-year-old daughter, Dolly. Their son Harry, who was 12, had already been helping to groom me and their second horse, Captain. Polly and her little girl made much of me, and it was a great treat to be petted again and talked to in a gentle voice. Polly thought I was very handsome and much too good to be a cab horse, if it were not for my broken knees. We don't know whose fault that was. I shall give him the benefit of the doubt, for I never drove a firmer, neater stepper. The first week of my life as a cab horse was very tiring. I was anxious and harassed by the noise and the hurry of the London traffic. But I soon found out that Jerry was as good driver as I had ever known. What was better, he took as much thought for his horses as he did for himself. He kept us very clean and always gave us plenty of food. But the best thing about my time there was our Sundays for rest. We worked so hard in the week that I do not think we could have kept it up otherwise. It also gave us time to enjoy each other's company. One lady wanted us to take her to church every Sunday, but Jerry was firm about it. He said working 7 days a week was too much for his horses as well as himself. When he refused, the lady was quite cross at first, but then she saw that he was right. Jerry didn't lose her custom over it. The Christmas. Christmas and the New Year are very merry times for some people, but for cabmen and their horses, it is no holiday. There are so many parties and balls that the work is hard and often late. Sometimes driver and horse have to wait for hours shivering with cold, while the cheery people inside are dancing away to the music. Jerry used me for most of the evening work, and we had a great deal of late work in Christmas week. Jerry had a bad cough, and standing around in the cold made it worse. One night, when we got home, it was so bad that he couldn't speak. He gave me a rub down as usual, although he could hardly get his breath. Then Polly brought me a warm meal, and they locked the door for the night. Next day was very strange. It was just like a Sunday. Harry came in to clean and feed us and to sweep out the stalls, but he didn't whistle or sing as he usually did. 2 days passed like that, and there was great trouble indoors because Jerry was dangerously ill. He grew better at last, but the family was still in trouble. The doctor had said that Jerry must never go back to the cab work again if he wished to live to be an old man. After a while, Jerry managed to find a job as a coachman. A cottage with a green went with the job, and family was very pleased. As for me, I was heavy-hearted as I was led away to a sale once more. As I waited unhappily at the sale, I noticed a man who looked like a gentleman farmer. I saw his eye rest on me, and I pricked my ears and looked at him. There's a horse, Willie, that has known better days, he said to a young boy with him. He gave me a kind pat as he spoke. Poor old fellow. Couldn't you buy him and make him strong again, Grandpa? As the boy stroked my face. Like you did with Ladybird. The farmer laughed. I can't buy every old horse and make him strong again. As he spoke, he slowly felt my legs. Just trot him out, will you? He said to the man who had brought me to the sale. I arched my poor thin neck, raised my tail a little, and threw out my legs as well as I could, for they were very stiff. All right, I'll take him, said the farmer, whose name was Mr. Thorogood. From now on, I had good food, perfect rest, soft turf, and a gentle exercise. I began to feel quite young again. One day in March, Mr. Thorogood tried me out in a light carriage. My legs were no longer stiff, and I did the work with perfect ease. Mr. Thorogood was pleased. He said to Willie, "Now we must look for a quiet place for him where he will be well looked after." One day that summer, the groom cleaned and brushed me with such care that I thought some new change must be at hand. I think even the harness had an extra polish. Willie seemed half anxious, half merry as he got into the carriage with his grandfather. "If the ladies take to him," said the old gentleman, "they'll be suited and he'll be suited. We can but only try." We drove through the village and up to a pretty house with a lawn and shrubbery at the front. Willie stayed with me while Mr. Thorogood went into the house. Soon he returned, followed by 3 ladies. They all came and looked at me and asked questions. One of them took to me very much. She said she was sure she should like me. I had such a good face. Another, a tall, pale lady, said that she would always be nervous in riding behind a horse that had once been down. It isn't always the horse's fault. Why don't you have him on trial so that your coachman can see what he thinks? And so it was arranged. In the morning, the lady's smart-looking groom came for me. I was led home, placed in a comfortable stable, fed, and left to myself. The next day, when the groom was cleaning my face, he said, "That is just like the star that Black Beauty had." He went on talking to himself. He was much the same height too. I wonder where he is now. Then he noticed my white foot and began to look me over more carefully. White star on the forehead, one white foot on the off side, then looking at my back, and there is that little patch of white that we call Beauty's 3-penny bit. It must be Black Beauty. Why, Beauty, Beauty, do you remember me? Little Joe Green. And he began patting and patting me, and as if he was overjoyed. He hugged me. He kissed me on my nose. That afternoon, after I had taken the ladies for a safe, gentle drive, I heard Joe telling them that he was sure I was Squire Gordon's old Black Beauty. They were already pleased with me, so they decided to keep me and call me by my own name, Black Beauty. I have now lived in this happy place a whole year. Joe is the best and the kindest of the grooms, and my work is easy and pleasant. My ladies have promised that I shall never be sold, and so I have nothing to fear, and here my story ends. My troubles are all over, and I'm at home. I'm home. At last, my troubles are all over, and I'm at home. Often before I'm quite awake, I fancy I'm still in the orchard at Birtwick, standing with my old friends under the apple trees. The end.